Okay. So this is the book of letters that the Hamburg Bezdin solicited from different rabbis. And basically, it's a response a year later or half a year later to the first book, which was reformers asking basically Orthodox rabbis for responses. That one was called Noga HaTzedek. This one is called Eli Divrei Habrit. Noga HaTzedek means light of justice, righteousness, and this of course means that these are the words. Eli Divrei Habrit is the words of the covenant. So polemical books are always named in very specific ways, as I mentioned before. Usually, everybody feels that, right? The reformers are basically saying, there's this sense of justice and righteousness, and these folks are saying there's a sense of covenant. And then other people will write books and call them, Melchemes Hashem, the War of God, or things like that. So this is a letter from, I just thought what we'd do is look at a couple of the letters here, a few of the letters, and look at the place where they talk about organs. What's their argument against organs? We saw what the argument for was. We saw 3 letters in the in Noga HaTzedek or Noga, Noga HaTzedek, and the arguments were not bad. They were sort of like, this should be permitted. It's going to inspire people, so let's do it. Here, obviously, you're going to find a very different approach. These are all letters that are opposed, and this is Rabbi Hirsch Shire, who is the rabbi of Mentz. Now, I tried to, sort of Google the person and find him and see who he was. I couldn't find much about him. The letter after this, the third letter, is from the Chassam Sofer, so that we know very well. So he writes, but I think what's interesting is to compare, let's say, 2 or 3 of these authors and see, are their arguments the same or different from each other? What's their tack? We don't want to get to the same place, which is don't use organs, because I think the meta thing is they're trying to preserve Judaism as they see it. They're worried about the reform, but they have to make halachic arguments. So it says, can you play an instrument in the shul on Shabbos? Now, it's an interesting question, by the way, that they've kind of made the question, can you do it on Shabbos? That seems to be, that's right. There were 3 questions they'd set out in the beginning that they're writing to all these rabbis about. One was, can you, might be Munster, Germany, could be. I should check that. One was, can you do the Amida silently? One is, can you change the language? I think, and then the last one, of course, was the organ. But it was the question of can you use the organ on Shabbos. That's how the question was phrased. So he says, Lo Nelam Einechem. So he says, it's not hidden from you what it writes in the Shulchan Aruch about dancing, right? So we know over there, the Ramah writes that you're not allowed to dance and clap because you might make the Shulchan Aruch writes you're not allowed to dance and clap because it might make an instrument on Shabbos. And the Ramah says, no, we are not expert at making instruments anymore. So you're allowed to dance, clap, and we're not worried about you making instruments anymore. And that's, of course, why we sometimes do dance and clap on Shabbos. Siv Beis Tamim, and I wonder if Sfardim don't do that. I don't know. Siv Beis Tamim, Chadamisham, the Mutav Shogigim. Now he says there are 2 reasons, actually, that the Ramah says you can do it. Although I don't think that this first reason is explicit in the Shulchan Aruch. We can look it up right now. But one he says is that they should be, that if you rebuke them, they're going to do it anyway. It sounds like so about clapping and dancing. So better that they should be doing it without knowing it's forbidden than do it anyway. This is what one of the commentaries on the Gemara says is the main reason. Friza bavada in lahatir b'Torah heter Torah's heter, Torah's kviya. He says if that's the reason that you don't want them to, that they're going to do it anyway, you don't want them to do it on purpose, you'd rather they do it by accident, then you definitely shouldn't say it's permitted to them as a general rule. And that's even Erev Shabbos, im lo b'makom mitzvah, if it's not for mitzvah. In other words, here he's making an interesting distinction. He's saying the Shulchan Aruch had said, let's take a look back at that Shulchan Aruch. Shema Machas, Shema Matas. So this is a this is the Shulchan Aruch here is talking about things that are forbidden. Can you see this? I think you can. Things that are forbidden because of sound on Shabbos. You're not allowed to make loud sounds on Shabbos, sort of a weekday thing. It says Shmas kol b'kli shir aser. Not allowed to hear a musical instrument. Aval lahakish al hadeles, but to knock on a door, that is permitted, as long as it's not a way of making music. The Ramah writes, if you didn't do anything, it's permitted. In other words, you can hear music, you just can't play it. Those who call to their friends and they whistle like a bird, they're permitted to do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to use a door knocker, even though you're not trying to make a song. Nevertheless, since this is a vessel that's specifically for making sound, you're not allowed to use it. You're allowed to knock with your hand, but not with a door knocker. You can't wake people up for shul by banging a pot if it's made for that, but you can knock on the door. Let's see why this is. Quickly. And he says it's not necessarily just a musical instrument that's forbidden. And the reason is let's see next paragraph. You're allowed, there are those who permit to say to a non-Jew that they should play an instrument on Shabbos for a wedding. Now, I assume it means that the wedding was right before Shabbos and the wedding party's on Shabbos. The Ramah writes, and even if you want to tell them to fix the instrument, which is forbidden biblically, you're allowed to do that because of the honor of the bride and groom. But if it's not for bride and groom, it's forbidden. It sounds like, by the way, from the Ramah right there, that you could ask a non-Jew to play an instrument on Shabbos. And he says, today we're even more lenient. Sounds like we're even more lenient. And we'll see that in the next chapter. Okay. Now he's talking about making sounds on Shabbos. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay. Not allowed to clap. You can't clap your hand on your thigh. And you can't dance. This is a Shulchan Aruch, the Sephardic opinion. It's a rabbinic decree because you might create a musical instrument or fix a musical instrument. Now, you not necessarily have musical instruments here, but maybe you'll make one or maybe you'll pull one out and fix it. And that would be forbidden biblically. But therefore, you're not allowed to clap or dance. Even to hit your finger on the ground to the rhythm or on the door or one against the other or to use a nut to shake. All of that is forbidden because you might come to fix a musical instrument. It does seem a little far-fetched, but that's what it is. Haggah, the Ramah, that's the Shulchan Aruch, the Sephardic opinion of Rabbi Yosef Karo. The Ramah writes, this is Rabbi Moshe Isserles, he was the Ashkenaz opinion. He says, well, hey, today we actually do dance and clap. He says, and we don't stop anybody from doing it. So why is that? So he says, and this is what's getting quoted there, he says, first of all, the reason we do it is because they're going to do it anyway. They're going to sing and dance anyway. And we don't want them to be doing it, to be violating it on purpose. We'd rather they were violating it by accident. There are certain things that are rabbinic, this applies to rabbinic prohibitions. If you know people can do it anyway, you shouldn't say anything to them because now they're doing it, they don't know they're not supposed to do it. But if you tell them, then it's on purpose. That's the first answer. The second answer is there are those that say that in our time, hakol shari, this is all permitted. Because we are not expert at making instruments. And we should not have a decree that, we're worried you're going to make an instrument or fix an instrument. Because it's very rare that happens, that you need to fix a musical instrument. You're not even using a musical instrument. And maybe that's why we're so lenient about it all. Now, if you read this Ramah, you would say, certainly according to the first answer, you should not be doing this. You shouldn't even be singing and dancing. According to the second answer, it sounds like maybe he's saying it's permitted, but it would sound like maybe you shouldn't do it. That's a Mishnah Berurah. This is the Chavetz Chaim. Hi, l'hakel b'kol koyal tipuach v'sibug frika. He says that which the Ramah says we today seem to be that we're lenient about all of this. He says this is talking about singing and dancing. Below all shadra miniskum, but not on everything else that's mentioned in this chapter. And he says, even when it comes to dancing and clapping, we really shouldn't do it unless it's for a mitzvah. Or because you don't want them to do it out of ignorance. Let's see one other commentary. I'm not going to run very classic commentary. Don't say anything, accepts it as it is. You're not allowed to dance. Simchas Torah, we do allow it on Simchas Torah because it's only rabbinically forbidden, and we have to do it for Kavod HaTorah, for the honor of the Torah. So it is. So I would say two things about this. In other words, number one, it's very tenuous, right? Even singing and dancing seems pretty tenuous from this, except that he says, everybody does it, so we permit it. It kind of sounds like you shouldn't sing and dance. I mean, you shouldn't clap and dance on Shabbos. On the other hand, when it comes to hiring a non-Jew to play music, it doesn't sound like that's such a problem. And it seems like you could even argue that singing and dancing is a bigger problem than hiring a non-Jew for a wedding. Now that was specifically a wedding. He definitely does, use this language. Now, what does it mean that today everybody does this? You go into the most religious, Hasidic movements. Go to a Tish and Borough Park in Bubba and Bells and in any of the Hasidic groups, they dance on Friday night. What's going on, right? So obviously we rely on this Ramah, but but it's hard to believe that we're still in a status of don't tell those Hasidim because they're doing it, but they're not really supposed to do it, so at least they'll do it and be ignorant. I mean, so it's funny. It's not like everything has stayed static around these issues for sure. Okay, so that's what he's quoting here. right? So that the Rama writes two reasons you could do it. Number one, you just want people to do it out of ignorance. You don't want them to do it on purpose. And he said, and now the question is, what's the main reason? If that's the main reason, then you definitely shouldn't permit it over here, because you're permitting it blanket. If the main reason is because we're worried you're going to make an instrument, nobody knows how to make an instrument today, then maybe it would be permitted. That was his second reason. The Rama writes a second reason, which is today we're not expert at making instruments. Rak She says that doesn't seem to him to be the main reason. Because and he says the problem with playing, an instrument, according to most achronim, is forbidden if it's not for a mitzvah. This is what the Levush writes in Orach Chaim, not like the Magen Avram. Now he says we should only permit dancing and clapping. Now you sort of made a switch. Like when you read the Ramah, you think, oh, maybe dancing and clapping is much worse than having a non-Jew play instruments. But here he says, no, we should only permit. Here he's saying the opposite. He's reading the Ramah as the opposite. Kanira, so he said, the Radvaz writes, Kanira ba'alil milashono shekatvu de ba'artzeh. He writes that in our countries, ein simcha ela b'shirim. The only joy is with instruments, b'shir mishvachim, with songs and praise. So he says, it sounds like from that you shouldn't sing and dance at all. You should only sing. Okay. Says and he says this heter that we permit playing an instrument for a mitzvah, says that doesn't really apply at all today. So there's a general rule about the temple that rabbinic things that are forbidden rabbinically did not apply in the temple. So in theory, no. So, but there were no rabbinic prohibitions in the temple. There's some inside and outside. So he says also, here's another argument. He says, today is different, he says, because the Ramah writes, this is very interesting. The Ramah writes, we're not expert at making instruments. And he says, today, everybody knows how to play a musical instrument. They're expert at it. They know the names of the instruments. They know how to work them. Milvad sha'ari klei zemer, they're inventing new instruments every day, he says. And so he says this heter of the Ramah, this permission of the Ramah, though, you can sing and dance because we don't know how to play musical instruments, how to fix musical instruments. This doesn't apply at all today. We all know how to fix musical instruments. Hello. Hutra rak mitzvah rabba, and therefore it should only be permitted for a great mitzvah, like for a chuppah, as the Magen Avram writes. So dem klal, lo delo mitzvah zakon. Machain kebenin dan, chazer esel lemakam ve'en hat klal shlo makam mitzvah. Man tfachim zanikra mitzvah. It's probably share. And who says anyway that it's a mitzvah? You definitely want to. It's not a mitzvah to pray with instruments. That's not a mitzvah. That's not adarabba. He says that it's just the opposite. In fact, Jews never used instruments after the temple to pray. Now, he's made a jump here, right? It seems from the Ramah like it was about dancing. It didn't seem, if I'm correct, that the Ramah had a problem with a non-Jew playing an instrument. Right? He had said there were those who permit to say to a non-Jew that you can play. And then the Ramah seemed quite lenient about a non-Jew, that you could even tell him to fix it if it's for a mitzvah. Although he does say that's for chassan and kala, that's for bride and groom, but without that, it would be forbidden. But that's to tell a non-Jew to fix it. So he sort of made a bit of a jump here, from saying that, it seems like he sort of jumped to having instruments played for you is definitely forbidden because today we know how to fix an instrument. But the Rama was talking about dancing and clapping then. He's also going to be led to the problem of maybe you can't dance and clap anymore if he makes that argument. That's going to be a problem, I think, for the Orthodox community. So it's interesting that we'll see a little bit more of this. We'll see different tacts and different rabbis. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.